The rainbow flag burned in his hands, its colors bleeding into the asphalt under the weight of his rage. Ethan Caldwell, a man carved from the hard edges of rural Montana, stood in the heart of San Francisco's Pride Parade, his boots grinding the fabric into the street as the crowd gasped. He didn't belong here, and he wanted everyone to know it. It was June, the air thick with glitter and the pulse of music, but Ethan's heart thundered louder than the drums. He'd come to the city for a construction job, not for this chaos of colors and unapologetic joy. The sight of men holding hands, women with buzzed hair kissing under rainbow banners, and children waving tiny flags churned something ugly in him, something he'd been taught to bury deep. His father's voice echoed in his mind, "This ain't natural, Ethan. You stand for what's right." So he did. He tore the flag from a bystander's hands, ripped it apart, and let it fall. The crowd surged, a wave of outrage, but one man stepped forward. Julian Rivera, with his warm brown eyes and a denim jacket pinned with a small rainbow, didn't flinch. He was lean, unassuming, but his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You don't get to ruin this for us," he said, his words steady but laced with fire. Ethan, towering over him, sneered and shoved Julian hard, sending him stumbling into the street. The crowd roared, but Julian only stood, brushed himself off, and met Ethan's glare with a look that wasn't anger, it was pity. That moment, frozen in the golden California light, would haunt Ethan for months. He didn't know then that Julian, the man he'd knocked down, would one day hold his life in his hands. Ethan drove back to his temporary apartment in Oakland that night, the city's vibrancy fading into the gray of his thoughts. He'd grown up in a small town where differences were whispered about, not celebrated. His father, pastor, had preached against sinful lifestyles, and Ethan had absorbed it like gospel. But San Francisco was different. It was loud, unapologetic, and it made him feel like an outsider in a way he'd never known. He tossed the torn remnants of the flag into a dumpster, convincing himself he'd won something. Julian, meanwhile, returned to his life as a nurse at San Francisco General Hospital. He'd moved to the city a decade ago, leaving behind a conservative family in Texas who'd never accepted him as a gay man. Pride was his sanctuary, a place where he could breathe freely, but Ethan's violence had shaken him. Not because of the shove Julian had faced worse, but because of the hatred in Ethan's eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was pain, raw and unprocessed. Julian had seen it before in patients, in families, in himself. He wanted to hate Ethan, but instead, he felt a strange pull to understand him. Weeks passed, and Ethan threw himself into his work on a downtown high-rise. Construction was his world, steel, concrete, the rhythm of labor. But the city kept challenging him. His co-workers, a mix of locals and transplants, talked openly about their lives. One, a burly man named Mike, casually mentioned his husband over lunch. Ethan bristled but said nothing. He didn't want to be the guy who started fights. Not here. Yet the memory of pride lingered, the weight of Julian's gaze gnawing at him. One muggy August afternoon, disaster struck. A scaffolding collapse sent Ethan plummeting 2 stories, his body crashing onto rebar and concrete. Blood poured from his abdomen, his vision blurring as paramedics swarmed. At the hospital, doctors barked orders, and Ethan's world narrowed to pain and fear. He needed blood. Fast, his rare AB negative type was in short supply. As he slipped in and out of consciousness, a familiar face appeared above him. Julian, in scrubs, his eyes calm but focused, was preparing a transfusion. "You," Ethan rasped, recognition flickering through the haze. Julian didn't hesitate. "Yeah, me. Stay still. You're gonna be okay." His hands moved with precision, hooking up the blood bag. Ethan's mind reeled. The man he'd humiliated, the one he'd shoved to the ground, was now saving his life. And the blood Julian had donated it himself. A rare match, just hours before. Ethan woke to the sterile hum of the hospital, tubes snaking from his arms. Julian was gone, but the weight of his presence lingered. Ethan's body ached, but his mind was louder, replaying the Pride incident, the flag, the shove. He'd always seen himself as strong, righteous, but now he felt small, weak. The man he'd despised had given him life, and Ethan didn't know how to process it. Julian, on his break, sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at his coffee. He'd known it was Ethan the moment he saw him on the gurney. The irony wasn't lost on him saving the man who'd attacked him at Pride. But Julian didn't believe in holding grudges. He'd learned that from years of rejection, from fighting for his place in a world that didn't always want him. He'd donated blood regularly, a habit born from seeing too many patients die waiting. That it was Ethan on the table felt like fate's cruel joke. When Ethan was stable, Julian visited his room. Ethan's eyes widened, his jaw tightening. "Why'd you do it?" he asked, voice hoarse. "After what I did to you." Julian leaned against the doorframe, his expression soft but unflinching. "Because it's what I do. I don't get to choose who deserves help. And neither do you." Those words hit Ethan like a punch. He turned away, staring at the ceiling, unable to meet Julian's gaze. For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions not just at Pride, but in every judgment he'd carried, every lesson he'd accepted without question. Julian left, but his words stayed, burrowing into Ethan's conscience. Over the next weeks, Ethan's recovery was slow. Physical therapy forced him to confront his body's limits, but it was his mind that hurt more. He couldn't stop thinking about Julian, about the blood that now ran through his veins. It was a debt he didn't know how to repay. He started asking questions, learning about the hospital, about Julian's work. He overheard nurses talking about Julian's long hours, his quiet kindness, his advocacy for patients who had no one else. Ethan felt a pang of shame, but also something new: curiosity. One evening, Ethan found Julian in the hospital chapel, lighting a candle. "I don't get it," Ethan said, his voice low. You. And you still helped me." "Why?" Julian looked at him, his eyes steady. "Because I know what it's like to be judged. And I know you're more than the guy who tore up that flag." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't know how. But as he limped back to his room, something shifted. For the first time, he wondered if his father's teachings, the ones he'd clung to like scripture, might be wrong. Ethan's hospital stay stretched into weeks, each day a battle between his body's healing and his mind's unrest. The sterile white walls felt like a cage, trapping him with thoughts he'd never dared to face. Julian's blood coursed through him, a constant reminder of the man he'd wronged. He'd always seen the world in black and white, right and wrong, us and them. But Julian's act of selfless grace blurred those lines, leaving Ethan adrift. He started noticing things he'd ignored before. The nurse who brought his meals, a trans woman named Lila, had a laugh that filled the room with warmth. A janitor, Miguel, wore a rainbow bracelet and hummed show tunes while mopping. These were the people Ethan had been taught to dismiss. Yet they cared for him with a kindness he didn't deserve. It gnawed at him, this dissonance between what he'd believed and what he now saw. One afternoon, Julian stopped by to check Ethan's chart. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken questions. Ethan broke it first. "You ever hate someone so much you can't stand it?" he asked, staring at his bandaged hands. Julian paused, setting the chart down. "Yeah. But hate's a choice. You can unlearn it." Ethan scoffed, but it lacked conviction. "Easy for you to say. You're the hero here." Julian's laugh was soft, almost sad. "I'm no hero. I'm just a guy who's been knocked down enough to know it doesn't define me." He left before Ethan could respond, but the words lingered like a challenge. Discharged from the hospital, Ethan returned to his Oakland apartment. But the city felt different now. The construction site was back in motion, but Ethan's heart wasn't in it. He'd catch himself watching couples on the street, two men laughing over coffee, a woman with a rainbow tattoo pushing a stroller. They weren't threats. They were just people. The realization felt like betrayal, like he was turning his back on his father's voice, on the man he'd been. He started seeking out Julian, not consciously at first. He'd pass by the hospital on his lunch breaks, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. One day, he saw Julian outside, handing out water bottles to homeless kids in the Castro. Ethan watched from across the street, his chest tight. Julian's ease, his quiet strength, was magnetic. Ethan hated how it drew him in. Finally, he worked up the nerve to approach. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice rough. Julian looked surprised but nodded. They sat on a bench in Dolores Park, the city sprawling below them. Ethan struggled for words, his hands fidgeting. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I was raised to think certain things about people like you. And now I'm here, and you saved my life, and I don't know what to think anymore." Julian listened, his face unreadable. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said. "Just start by listening. Really listening." Ethan nodded, but the weight of his past clung to him. That night, he dug through old boxes in his apartment, finding a photo of his father preaching, his face stern and unyielding. Ethan stared at it, then set it face down. For the first time, he didn't want to be that man's son. He started small. He read articles online, stories of people like Julian, lives marked by struggle but also by resilience. He watched Pride footage from that day, cringing at his own actions. The flag he'd torn wasn't just fabric. It was a symbol of survival for people who'd fought harder battles than he ever would. The shame was suffocating, but it pushed him forward. One evening, Ethan attended a community event at a local LGBT center, his heart pounding as he stepped inside. The room was filled with laughter, music, and stories of pain, yes, but also of love and triumph. He felt out of place, but no one stared or judged. A woman named Sarah, with bright blue hair and a warm smile, handed him a soda and asked about his day. It was so normal, so human, that it disarmed him. Julian was there, too, speaking to a group of teens about safe healthcare. Ethan watched, mesmerized by his passion. When their eyes met, Julian smiled a small, genuine smile that made Ethan's chest ache. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stayed until the event ended, helping stack chairs, feeling a flicker of belonging for the first time. As he walked home, the city lights blurred through unshed tears. Ethan didn't know who he was becoming, but he knew he couldn't go back. Winter settled over San Francisco, the fog wrapping the city in a quiet hush. Ethan's body had healed, but his mind was a battlefield. He'd started questioning everything: his upbringing, his beliefs, the man he'd been. Julian's act of saving him had cracked open a door, and now Ethan couldn't stop peering through it, even if it terrified him. He began volunteering at the LGBT Center, at first just to see Julian, but soon for something deeper. The people there, Sarah, Miguel, a non-binary artist named Alex, shared their lives with a raw honesty that humbled him. They didn't hide their scars, physical or otherwise, and Ethan found himself opening up, too. He told Sarah about his father, about the flag, about the guilt that kept him awake. She listened, then hugged him, her embrace fierce and forgiving. "You're here now," she said. "That's what matters." Julian noticed the change in Ethan but kept his distance, wary of the man who'd once lashed out. Yet he couldn't deny the sincerity in Ethan's efforts. One night, after a support group meeting, they ended up alone in the center's kitchen, washing dishes. The silence was comfortable, but Ethan broke it. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For pride. For what I did." Julian dried his hands, his expression soft but guarded. "I forgave you a long time ago, but you've got to forgive yourself." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He wanted to say more, to explain the storm in his chest. But Julian's phone buzzed. "Ida, hospital emergency." "Duty calls," Julian said, flashing a tired smile before leaving. Ethan watched him go, feeling a pull he couldn't name. The next day, Ethan returned to the construction site, but his heart wasn't in the work anymore. He'd started sketching in his free time, rough drawings of the city, of pride, of Julian's face. Art had been his secret as a kid, a way to escape his father's rigid world, but he'd buried it. Now, it was coming back, like a language he'd forgotten he spoke. He showed a sketch to Alex, who grinned and invited him to an art workshop at the center. For the first time, Ethan felt like he was building something, not just tearing it down. But the past wasn't done with him. A letter arrived from his father, terse and demanding. "Heard you're mixed up with those people in the city. Come home, Ethan. You're better than this." The words stung, reopening old wounds. Ethan crumpled the letter but didn't throw it away. He wasn't ready to confront his father. Not yet. Instead, he sought out Julian again, finding him at the hospital during a rare quiet shift. "Can I buy you a coffee?" Ethan asked, nervous. Julian raised an eyebrow but agreed. They sat in a diner across the street, the neon sign casting a warm glow over their table. Ethan opened up about his father, about the weight of expectations he'd carried. Julian listened, his eyes steady, and shared his own story growing up in Texas, coming out, losing his family but finding a new one in San Francisco. You ever miss them? Ethan asked. Every day, Julian admitted. But I found people who love me for me. That's worth more than anything I lost. Ethan envied that clarity. He wanted to be that sure, that free. As they parted, Julian's hand brushed his, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through Ethan. He didn't pull away, but he didn't know what it meant, either. Spring brought pride again, and Ethan felt a mix of dread and longing. He wanted to go, not to destroy, but to understand. He told Sarah, who grinned and handed him a rainbow pin. Wear it, she said. Own it. Ethan pinned it to his jacket, his hands trembling. At the parade, he stood on the sidelines, watching the floats, the families, the joy. Julian was there, marching with the hospital's float, his smile radiant. Their eyes met, and Julian waved him over. Ethan hesitated, then stepped into the crowd, the pin glinting in the sun. Pride was overwhelming, a riot of color and sound that both thrilled and unnerved Ethan. He walked beside Julian, the rainbow pin on his jacket feeling like a badge of courage. The crowd pulsed with life-drag queens in towering heels, families waving flags, elders who'd fought for this moment decades ago. Ethan felt like an outsider still, but for the first time, he wanted to belong. Julian noticed his tension and nudged him. You okay? Ethan nodded, though his heart raced. Just a lot. Last time I was here, he stopped, shame choking his words. You're not that guy anymore, Julian said, his voice firm. You're here now. That's what counts. They walked on, Julian pointing out friends, sharing stories of past prides. Ethan listened, soaking in the history, the Stonewall riots, the AIDS crisis, the victories hard won. It wasn't just a party. It was a rebellion, a celebration of survival. Ethan's sketches came to mind, and he imagined capturing this moment, the defiance, the love, the humanity. That night, they ended up at a bar in the Castro, packed with Pride revelers. Julian introduced Ethan to his chosen family, Lila, Sarah, Alex, and others who welcomed him without judgment. Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't known he craved. He laughed, danced, let himself be pulled into the joy. When Julian's hand found his during a slow song, Ethan didn't pull away. The touch was electric, grounding, and terrifying all at once. Later, outside under the stars, Ethan spoke. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. I've spent my whole life thinking one way, and now, I don't know who I am. Julian's eyes softened. You're figuring it out. That's enough for now. Ethan wanted to say more, to ask what this feeling was, but fear held him back. Instead, he walked Julian home, the city quiet around them. At Julian's doorstep, they stood close, the air charged. Thank you, Ethan said, his voice thick. For everything. Julian smiled, then leaned in, kissing Ethan's cheek. It was soft, brief, but it set Ethan's heart on fire. He walked away dizzy, the world tilting under his feet. The next day, Ethan returned to the LGBT Center, sketching furiously. He drew Julian, the parade, the flag he'd once destroyed. Art became his way of processing, of making sense of the chaos inside him. Sarah saw his work and insisted he show it at the center's next exhibit. Ethan hesitated but agreed, his stomach nodding at the thought of being seen. Meanwhile, Julian wrestled with his own feelings. He'd always been guarded, burned too many times by people who couldn't handle his truth. But Ethan's transformation, his raw vulnerability, stirred something in him. He wanted to trust it, but trust was hard-won. Still, he found himself seeking Ethan out, inviting him to coffee, to art shows, to quiet moments that felt like something more. One evening, Ethan showed Julian his sketches. "This is you," he said, pointing to a drawing of Julian at Pride, his eyes bright with defiance. Julian stared, moved by the care in every line. "You see me," he said softly. "I'm trying," Ethan replied, his voice breaking. Their connection deepened, built on shared silences and tentative touches. But Ethan's past loomed. His father called, demanding he return to Montana. "You're throwing away your soul," he said. Ethan hung up, his hands shaking. He didn't want that life, but cutting it away felt like losing a limb. At the art exhibit, Ethan's sketches drew a crowd. Julian stood beside him, proud but quiet. One Paisea torn rainbow flag mended with gold thread brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "It's kintsugi," Ethan explained. "The Japanese art of repairing broken things. It's about making something beautiful from the cracks." Julian squeezed his hand, and Ethan felt it, a spark of something bigger than fear. Summer returned, and with it, a new chapter. Ethan had moved to a small apartment in the Mission, closer to the LGBT center, to Julian. He'd left construction, taking a job teaching art to kids at the center. His sketches had become a bridge, connecting him to a community he'd once rejected. But the ghost of his past still lingered, whispering doubts. Julian, too, was navigating uncharted waters. He'd fallen for Ethan, despite his instincts screaming caution. Their moments together, late-night talks, walks along the bay, stolen kisses felt like a dream, but Julian knew dreams could shatter. He told Ethan about his fears, about the family he'd lost, the partners who'd left when things got hard. Ethan listened, his heart aching to prove he was different. One night, Ethan invited Julian to his apartment. The walls were covered in sketches. Pride. The center, Julian's face. "I want to be someone you can trust," Ethan said, his voice raw. "I'm not perfect, but I'm trying." Julian took his hand, his eyes searching. "I see you trying. That's why I'm here." They kissed, not tentative this time, but hungry, real. It was a promise, fragile but fierce. Ethan felt the weight of his old self fall away, replaced by something new, something honest. But the past wasn't done. Ethan's father arrived in San Francisco, unannounced, his face a mask of disapproval. "This isn't you," he said, standing in Ethan's apartment, eyeing the sketches with disgust. "You're my son, not one of them." Ethan's chest tightened, but he stood tall. "I'm still your son. But I'm also me. And I'm proud of who I'm becoming." His father left, the door slamming behind him. Ethan sank to the floor, tears streaming. Julian found him there, wrapping him in a hug that felt like home. "You did it," Julian whispered. "You chose yourself." Pride came again, and Ethan marched this time, a rainbow flag draped over his shoulders. Julian walked beside him, their hands linked, the crowd cheering around them. Ethan's sketch of the mended flag had been turned into a banner, carried by Sarah and Alex. It was a symbol of his journey, of breaking and healing, of love that defied hate. At the hospital, Julian continued his work, saving lives, including those who'd once judged him. Ethan taught kids to draw, to see beauty in their own stories. They built a life together, not perfect, but real. Ethan's father never returned, but Ethan found peace in that loss, knowing he'd gained so much more. One evening, under a sunset streaked with pink and gold, Ethan and Julian stood on a hill overlooking the city. "I was so wrong about everything," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But you showed me what it means to be human." Julian smiled, his eyes bright. "You showed yourself, too." They kissed, the city alive below them, a testament to love's power to mend what's broken. Ethan had once destroyed a rainbow flag, but now he carried one in his heart, his colors brighter for the cracks they'd healed.